city of Philadelphia, I started to notice things that I didn't understand earlier in life. I started to notice people were living in the streets. People were hungry and in need of a better life, in need of opportunities to better themselves, better their families and their situation. But it seems in the big city of Philadelphia, with all these people walking by, I feel like nobody sees what I see. It's a cold world. Damn, it's a cold world. It got me feeling like
Throughout the last month, graduate social work students met with several families that have experienced homelessness in Philadelphia and in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. The families graciously told us their stories and their personal experience with homelessness. In order to protect their identity, their names have been changed.
This is a young woman, CJ, who became homeless after fleeing an abusive relationship.
At the age of 16, I moved out of my mother's home and began living with the father of my 2 children because of my mother's drug addiction. The father of my children was very abusive the entire time we were together, but when I was 18, the abuse worsened, and by the time I was 19, he broke my arm. When I decided to leave, I went from West Philly to my mom's house in North Philadelphia. Once I arrived, she asked me, "Where are you and your kids going to stay?" I was a former member of a group called the Parenting Project when I had my first child, and had a good relationship with the social worker there that I kept in touch with. I called her and she told me to go to the hospital. That's where they told me to get in touch with somebody from Women Against Abuse. I remember on January 29th, 2009, going to Women Against Abuse shelter, and I stayed there for 90 days. I then went on 3 housing interviews, but on April 20th, 2009, I moved into transitional housing at Help Philadelphia. I still had contact with my baby's father and his family. They live around the corner from Help Philadelphia. But as I changed, I started to see that I could do better for myself and my kid. I had a job at a daycare, I got my GED, and I was on my way to college. I only wanted him there for the kids, but when all the sexual action stopped, my children lost a father, or they barely had him around. I can honestly say I accepted that it's his choice to be there or not, but can never say that I closed the door to their relationship with their father. In transitional housing, there was always a what-if feeling in the back of my head about what if I can't get PHA, or what if I do. I can say I got too comfortable there. I didn't want to go from having a place of my own to living with someone again. When I moved into Help, it was a dream come true to me, but to someone else it could have been like, oh no, I have to get out of here. I never had my own room, but now I have a whole place to myself. My favorite part about Help Philadelphia was the sense of safeness and community, where everyone knows everyone. When I thought about leaving Help, I thought about what if I have to go back to living with people. I also thought about if I had my own place outside of Help Philadelphia, that it would be fearful. Fearful that it was just going to be me and my girls and that alone. But that was what I had to get over. Maybe it would be all work and no play, but most of the time a person has to work to live. It's just something that they do to make money.
While in transitional housing, it was never mentioned that CJ could get PHA. And one day she was called into the office and told she had her PHA. CJ was only 20 years old and afraid. She did not know anyone in the area where she would be moving to, but did not have a choice of what part of the city she would like to live in. She had to take what was offered to her.
I moved into my new home 2 years ago, and now my children are 5 and 4 years old. I attend Community College Philadelphia, and I only have 3 semesters before I graduate with my associate's degree in behavioral health. I think that affordable housing should be available to everybody who's in a homeless situation. It is a way to get on your feet.
To rent a house or an apartment can cost $600 a month plus utilities. If CJ did not have low-income housing, she could not go to school, she would have to work, and still be unable to afford the rent. CJ is now taking advantage of the help to finish school and to get a good job.
This is an interview with Ms. T and her story about how her and her son NT ended up in a transitional housing program.
Well, I was living in a 3-bedroom house that I rented from my landlord. But when he and his wife got a divorce, they wanted to split the property, and at that time I was kicked out. I went to court to get my house back, but because it was the divorced couple's property, I had to leave. I took my 2-year-old son and I tried to get into emergency housing, but there was no room for us. I ended up using all of my savings to stay in a hotel. When my money ran out, my son and I stayed with my pastor for some time. Finally, the emergency shelter had some room and we were able to go there. The emergency shelter was not great. The beds were available on a first come, first served basis. So I had to wake up early every morning just to guarantee that I had a bed for the next night. Eventually, I was able to renew my bed for 2 to 3 weeks instead of on a daily basis. It was difficult staying in the shelter though. There was a lot of heartache. You didn't even want to begin to imagine how it really was. On the outside of the shelter, things seemed to be okay. But once you got to where the residents stayed, it was completely different. After staying at the emergency shelter for some time, my son and I were then moved to another shelter. That shelter was the worst. We were freezing, the heaters would go out. It was an old school meant for kids with behavioral problems, so it was hidden away from the rest of the neighborhood. Everyone at the shelter kept to themselves. There was no sense of community. Things were stolen, people were always arguing, and there was always mice running around. There wasn't even enough room to worry about other people's problems. You just had to worry about yourself. Everyone there was either sad or angry. It was not a place of rest. I would have my bed but stay out all day and only come back when I needed somewhere to sleep. The shelter was atrocious and not suitable for children. I was lucky that I was able to keep my son with me at all times. But even when the shelters provided daycare, I kept NT with me because a lot of kids behaved badly and they used bad language, and I didn't want my son to be a part of that. I kept him with me everywhere I went. He went with me as well. I'm glad he was young when we were in the shelter because now he won't remember anything about them. The shelters provided a booklet of resources, but many of them were out of date and most were not really helpful. I complained a lot while staying in the shelter, but I realized I had to keep a positive mind.
After about a year in the shelter system, she was finally given a place in transitional housing. This was a tough program for her to go through. She had to attend weekly workshops that taught life skills such as anger management, nutrition, health, contraception, and self-esteem. The program requires that she put 1/3 of her income towards rent and 1/3 towards savings. She had a case manager who provided support and makes sure she is reaching her goals. Although there are a lot of rules for her to follow, she has to continue to push herself so that she can be stable and so that they can eventually get a place of their own.
I've had to change a lot of things in order to stay in transitional housing. But now I'm helping others adjust to the transition and help themselves.
Although there was a lot of shuffling around before she got into transitional housing, she was grateful for the structure and stability. She hopes to leave soon and find a place for her and her son.
Well, it's just us now. And I'll continue moving forward so that he and I can have a better life.
This story follows the journey of a husband, wife, and their son through becoming homeless and their non-homeless status now.
We became homeless after I was incarcerated and lost employment as a result. My wife wasn't earning enough money to support our family, and we ended up being evicted. We lived in our car for about a month, my wife and I, as well as our then 10-year-old son.
We were living in our car every night. I feared for my family because of car break-ins that were occurring, and I was also afraid that we would get in trouble by the police. There were a few times that they saw us but let us go. Throughout all of this, our son still continued to go to school. We called the shelter in our county and went to stay there for about 3 months. I did not want to go to a shelter. I could not believe that this was happening to us. But I'm glad we went. We were able to sleep and shower.
They discussed the struggles of the family being separated in the shelter because Mr. Smith had to stay in the male section of the shelter while Mrs. Smith and their son stayed together. They discussed how living in the shelter was difficult to get used to.
I got depressed and felt like I had hit rock bottom. I felt like this was the end of the road, but sometimes you have to take some steps back in order to move forward.
I ended up getting a job and started to go to college as a business major. We heard about a bridge transitional shelter in the area, and we contacted the supervisor of the program. Eventually, we were accepted into the program, in which we finally had our own place.